Well, hey, all you wiretappers. Good to be back here in the studio, Gangland Wire. I have another former intelligence unit detective, Tim Richards. Now, and if you don't, I didn't introduce myself. I'm sorry, guys. Some of you all may be new listeners. I'm Gary Jenkins, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective. Got this podcast, Gangland Wire. We deal with the mob. And I worked the mob in Kansas City, and Tim Richards worked it in St. Louis, just across the street. So welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Gary.
I'm really glad to have you. I was really glad to find this book. I've been working on a book myself, so I'm looking at your book, seeing how you did certain things, and then going back to mine. And my story is a little bit different, I guess, but different, but the same. We had some very, very similar experiences, guys. When Tim and I first started talking on the phone, it was like, oh my God, that's like I was talking to another guy in the same unit, because we had the same kind of experiences. Some of them we'll talk about, some of them we won't talk about on here. So but we're going to talk about the mafia primarily. And Tim, what I always found interesting, even back then in the 70s, there seemed to be little to no relationship or connection between Kansas City and St. Louis crime families. Do you remember that like that?
I recall that. We knew that Nick Sabella was a powerful guy in the families, but we never really saw anything that he was in St. Louis. The Chicago Mafia controlled St. Louis with some help from Detroit, the Detroit Mafia. Uh, the Chicago Mafia came in here in the late 50s when they were rebuilding downtown St. Louis, and they built the Poplar Street Bridge, which was called the Tunnel Project. They came through East St. Louis with a guy by the name of Buster Workman, who controlled everything in East St. Louis. And they used ghost workers. It was a federal funded bridge building event. And they used ghost workers there. And then these guys were getting rich. And in the meantime, they came over to St. Louis and infiltrated our two labor locals, 110 and 42. They also infiltrated 562, which is a pipe fitters union, very wealthy union, and they had them for decades. And they eventually controlled them. 110 was controlled totally, and 42 was controlled totally by the Chicago mob. 562 eventually went under. It was controlled totally by the Chicago mob. And the Chicago mob ran everything here with allegedly some dabbling by Detroit. I don't know how they've worked that out, but Detroit had some function here. But
yeah, Tim, you go in your Crooks, Kill, and Cops Lie book, guys, and I highly recommend you get this if you want an inside look at the St. Louis Police Intelligence Unit, at police intelligence everywhere. Why, this book will give it to you. And you have a second book before we get too far into this. Hold that one up. I couldn't find my copy. It's over across the room somewhere.
This is actually the sequel to Crooks, Kill, Cops, Lie.
Okay.
It's another St. Louis intelligence book. The unit was referred to as Intel 210, which was the code name for the unit within the police department. And this is my second book pertaining to the St. Louis organized crime guys. This goes deeply into the intelligence unit and what we actually did and the things that went on there between cops and crooks and FBI agents. And we were whores for the FBI. So we were.
Yeah.
We did all this shit, and the FBI would come over to our office and glean it all. But we didn't care. We enjoyed what we were doing, and we got to know these FBI guys, and we didn't mind helping them. The thing is that we couldn't get legal wiretaps, and they could.
Yeah.
And so we gave them information, whatever they needed. And but anyway, both of my books pertain to that intelligence and how the unit cops and the FBI and the other feds work together trying to get these guys.
Yeah, it's an interesting in St. Louis and Kansas City. From looking at your book, it was basically the same, different than in other cities. I think we really worked closely with the FBI also, and like you said, we were their go boys. We went out. They said, "Hey, we got this going on. Why don't you go check this out?" Well, see, the FBI, they have these high level sources because they've got all this power and all this money to spread around, and they can kick a damn grand jury indictment, aside if they want, in order to put pressure on somebody. We couldn't do that. We didn't have any local wiretaps. We finally got a law. We ran one here, and it was, I tell you what, you never want to do a wiretap unless you got a huge, huge, huge budget, which we
Yeah.
never do.
Yeah.
So, it's the same way here. It's really interesting. You talk about the labor racketeering in particular, and you go into that pretty in depth because there's more than just Chicago and more than Italian mafias, and then you had the Syrian mob in St. Louis that got heavy into union racketeering. So it's just a really interesting mix down there, Tim. Uh,
Well, the Syrian mob it was actually Lebanese. The
oh, that's
FBI,
right.
the FBI named it the Syrian mob, and it stuck. The newspapers picked up on it. We picked
Wow.
up on it. It was referred to as the Syrian mob, but they were political people. They were all politicians and business people within St. Louis, and the Leisures, Paul Leisure, Anthony Leisure. Paul Leisure was a hitman for years for the Chicago Mafia here in St. Louis, but Tony Giordano, they wanted to kill another Syrian guy by the name of Jimmy Michaels for control of a 110, local 110. Uh, Paul, Anthony Giordano told him to lay off of him because the Chicago mob told him, we don't want him killed. He had worked with them, for them, for years over in East St. Louis for Buster Workman. So they, Anthony Giordano told the Legions to lay off of him. The reason they hated him so much is because some Michaels family killed a Leisure guy over in East St. Louis back in the 50s, shot him in a bar and got away with it and killed him. And so there was a feud there between the two Syrian families, the Lebanese families. So the feud just festered and festered and festered. And they wanted to kill Jimmy Michaels for two reasons: revenge and control of local 110. Anthony Giordano died, and that left Jimmy Michaels wide open. So they blew him up in broad daylight with a car bomb on I-55 during rush hour. And
Yeah.
but then this gang war broke out. Then the Michaels retaliated and blew up Paul Leisure in front of his mom. So I was at both of those scenes certainly thereafter. They're in my book, and my pictures in the book at the scene. And but it was an interesting time there, and the politicians were scurrying because they'd been in bed with these people for the last 30 years.
I bet. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, they were scurrying, and it was just really crazy. There was another Lebanese family by the name of Webby, Sarkis Webby
Yeah.
Sr. was a lawyer and a very influential guy, and he owned the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas, and they were skimming money there. For somehow, this is how the Detroit Mafia comes into this. The Detroit Mafia, the New York Mafia, and the Chicago Mafia were skimming funds from Sarkis Webby's casino, and they would meet up here in St. Louis and divvy up this cash money. And we had gangsters coming in and out of here, like you would not believe it, from New York City, big gangsters. But it was just crazy how they were going after this skim money. But Sarkis Webby, they indicted him and Mike Trupiano, who was the head of the mafia here, and the head of one local 110, and they indicted them, and they also indicted Sarkis Webby Jr., the son of Sarkis Webby. And the dad died. Sarkis Webby died before he could go to trial, but little Sark did not, and he went to prison. He did hard time for a lot of years down in Florida. He's out now. He's a big timer, influential guy.
Really? And that was for skimming from the Aladdin.
No, it was a cable TV scam.
Another scam.
They were going to allow cable. This is when cable TV just began, and they wanted to come into St. Louis, and then these two gangsters said, "Yeah, you can come into St. Louis, but this is our town, and you're going to have to pay us." So they had it all on tape, and they all went down. They did not convict Mike Trupiano, but everybody else got convicted on it. And well, of course, Sarkis Webby Sr. died before he could go to prison.
Okay.
Little Sarkis Webby went to prison, but that's what they went down on. It wasn't the skimming, and it wasn't anything else that they had, all the dastardly things they had done. It was for something stupid like being greedy and wanting their cut of the cable TV money. And that's how they went down.
So you really had three Lebanese blood families, separate blood families that were then connected with the Italian La Cosa Nostra mafia in many ways, both in local schemes and in national schemes.
Yeah,
It
actually,
seems
only
like.
two because Sargas Webby Senior was part of the Leisure Gang.
Okay, I didn't
He
realize that.
he was allegedly the guy that was keeping the peace. He was an attorney. He was a smooth guy, and Little Sarkis Whitby Jr. is a smooth guy. I mean, he drives nice cars, and he's a wealthy guy now, and he always was a wealthy guy. He grew up in Las Vegas. He was a St. Louis kid who grew up in. His daddy owned a casino in Vegas, so you can imagine
Yeah.
how he grew up.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
He's a scratch golfer. You know, he has women. I mean, he's a guy that people would look up to, but he's not a gangster anymore. In fact, I don't think he ever was a gangster. He was just a kid that wanted to be tough, and he wasn't tough. He's a small guy. But the reason they got him instead of the daddy, when the daddy died, but the reason I got him is that they had his phone tapped. They owned a hotel here in St. Louis too, called the Mayfair, and they were all afraid of Paul Leisure because he was a monster. He had killed 20 people
Yeah.
for the Chicago mob. The Chicago mob would call Tony Giordano, so we want this guy hit. They'd go to Paul Leisure, we want this guy hit. He killed 20 people for them. So they were all terrified of him. And he was crazy. Besides that, he was nuts. Wanted to stay on the good side of Paul Leisure. And so Paul Leisure called him on the phone at his Mayfair hotel. And they had just a casual conversation. And Paul Leisure said, I quote, he said, give me 245s and I'll shoot it out with these damn St. Louis cops. I'll kill a man. And Little Sark said, bye bye, Birdie. And all that stuff was taped. So in the meantime, David Leisure, who actually pulled the pin to kill Jimmy Michaels on I-55, he's the one that pulled the trigger on it.
Okay.
And everybody knew it. Well, he was hiding out because there was an arrest warrant for him. He was hiding out. So he went down to the Mayfair Hotel, and Little Sarkis Webby hit him. He hit him the police came in and looked for him, and they hid him in a big hotel laundry basket type thing, and put blankets and stuff on top of him. Well, everybody knew that. And so Little Sark went to prison for all that, aiding and abetting, running his mouth. What they did, they said, hey, listen here, man, you can plead guilty, or if you want to go to court, you can go to trial. And he had a good lawyer. And they said, but we got this taker. We were talking to Paul Leisure about being a tough guy, and little Sark said, yeah, I'm a tough guy, man. I've killed people before, I've done this and I've done that. I'm a street. Well, he wasn't, but he talked all that bravado on this tape. They were going to play it for the jury. And so I'll plead. So he pled.
And that Paul Leisure, did he get his legs blown off also?
He got one of them blown off. I was there when he was still in the car. He was living with his mom. If you believe that, he lived with his mom. It was a nice, beautiful day, fall day in St. Louis, and a call came out for an explosion. I drove down there immediately, and he was still in the car, and his mom was standing outside the car. He was a big, powerful, mean guy, man. Talking to his mother, it was pitiful. It was just pitiful. She was standing by the car, and she had heard the explosion, and one of his legs was gone. His fingers were all mangled and gone. There were dogs in the neighborhood grabbing his fingers. Yeah, grabbing his fingers. We were trying to get the dogs out. Get out of here! Get out of here!
Oh my God!
And the car was blown to smithereens, man. And it was a nice neighborhood. Oh yeah. And everybody said, get those dogs out of here. He's eating his fingers. And it was, and then his mom's standing there and he's in the car going, mom, man, it was pitiful, man.
That's like a friend of mine told me, he said he got shot in Vietnam. He said, when you get shot, he said, the first thing you do is call out for your mother.
Yeah.
He had his right there.
And I'll tell you what, after all that crap that he had pulled before he got blown up, they didn't even give him local 110. They gave him local 42, which is a lower local. And so he was an organizer for local 42. And he had this brand new helmet on, white helmet. He had it in the car. And it said, Paul Leisure, organizer, local 42. And so I grabbed it. I globbed onto it.
Ow.
And I took it to the office and I put it on a filing cabinet. And it was going to be a memorial, And I came back to work one day and the damn thing was gone. I said, "What happened to Paul Leisure's helmet?" And they said, "Oh, the FBI came in and got it." I said, "You
Yeah.
liars, man! Somebody took that home, you know?"
Somebody took it home, yeah.
Heck yeah,
Some captain or major or
heck yeah,
colonel
man!
came in and said, "I
Hell
want that."
yeah, yeah. I want it. You got it, sir. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you know how it goes. Shit rolls downhill, as we say.
Yeah, definitely, man.
Well, let's talk a little bit about then the Italian mob, and it goes way back uh, to the 30s, and prohibition and all that ends
Mhm.
up with Giordano was the boss for quite a while, and if I remember right, Giordano and Trupiano, what Mike Trupiano was basically the last boss, I think, Italian of La Cosa Nostra. Then they have some connection with Detroit. Didn't they send that kid down there from Detroit? Was he a nephew of Giordano?
Yeah, yeah. He was a nephew of Giordano, and he came from Detroit. He still was controlled. See, Giordano died. And so they said Mike Tripiano, but he was still controlled by the Chicago Mafia. How that
I
worked out,
I think I heard somewhere that IUPA had to approve of Trupiano then taking over,
yeah, yeah.
and Trupiano was not known to be a really skillful mafia boss, is my understanding.
No, he was pretty inept. I had dealings with him
Did
personally.
you?
Yeah. I got to the point where I got tired of following these guys around, so I'd pull them over and talk to them.
Yeah,
And one time, the New York Mafia was in town. I can't remember their names now, but they were high up on the mafia scale. There were two guys in my unit that did a lot of undercover stuff, and they would stay out the airport. So they saw him come in, and they followed him, and they went to a house. I don't know whose house it was. It could have been Giordano's house in South St. Louis County. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't John Vitale's. Anyway, they had a big meeting there, and Trupiano was chauffeuring them. And so these guys that had been surveilling them got me on the air and said, "Would you do a car check on Mike Trupiano and find out who's in the car with him?" I said, "Yeah." So I pulled him over on a busy St. Louis street, everyone on the way back to the airport. And I made him get out of the car. And Trupiano was furious, man, because these were high ranking
yeah.
uh, guys, he was furious. And I said, "You got in the car with you?" And he said, "They're friends of mine." I said, "Get out of the car. Everybody get out." Well, one big guy who was in the front seat got out. I don't remember his name. But then this other big mafia guy just sat in the back seat. They all had, real expensively dressed. Uh, so I said, "Give me your ID." And he said, "I don't have an ID." And he went like this. And he had this black suit on with a red silk on the inside of it. I bet it cost $2,000. Anyway, his airline ticket was in his pocket. I went, I pulled it.
Oh, here's who
I said,
you
"You don't
are.
need ID, man. I know who you are now." And I said, "What's your name, man?" So I got their names and dates of birth and everything. Well, it upset the FBI. I got called into the office. He said, "You do a car check on Mike Tripiano?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Who do you have in the car?" I said, "He had all these hots from New York City in there. He's big time hots." And he said, "Well, there's a guy there." And I said, "Who's this guy?" He's an FBI. Said, he didn't introduce him to me. The FBI agent, he was furious. He was furious that I did this. I don't know why. Apparently, one of them was probably a snitch. Is the only I could
Yeah.
figure. And they didn't want anybody messing with him. But it was crazy, man. There was you could throw a rock around here and say, "Listen, hit some goddamn FBI guy or hit some organized crime guy."
You mentioned John Vitale. Tell us about John Vitale. I remember he was kind of the Italian mafia's union guy, if I remember right.
Well, you see, back in the day, the unions they were a pawn that they wanted to control.
Oh yeah.
But they were mostly controlling gambling and prostitution. And I'm sure back in the day, like in the 70s when I first became a cop, the black people were all addicted to heroin, white heroin. I was in a mid city area. They were all addicted to everybody you stopped, everybody you had dealings with was having withdrawal from white heroin. Now the white heroin was coming from Europe. And it wasn't a situation like it was coming from Mexico or whatever, or
Right. That's
Colombia.
brown. Yeah.
That's
Brown
brown
hair.
hair, and they were all good. And everybody said the mafia didn't do it, didn't deal in white heroin. Well, I don't believe that, man. I mean, all these guys were addicted to white heroin, and then what they would do, they would buy this heroin from, I presume, a representative of the Chicago Mafia, and then they would cut it and they'd have their own business. And they were killing each other left and right with machine guns, just like it is today. But they were killing each other left and right over, the money it gotten screwed up. But everybody that we dealt with was screwed up with white heroin. And I'm sure that was part of John Vitale and Tony Giordano. I met Tony Giordano one time when I first became a cop in the '70s. We had a towing service. Most of those kind of places were run by the Chicago Mafia, and they were city organizations, and they had city employees, but the Chicago Mafia ran them. And one time, what they would do is they had a scam where they would tow your car and they wouldn't let you have it back. And it kept it for a certain amount of time. They could apply for another title and it would be their car. And so they were doing this. And this is 1970. And Tony Giordano was one of the guys, and he had another gangster with him whose name I can't remember right now. And they ran this towing service called Metropolitan Towing for the city. And so they played this scam where they wouldn't give people's cars back for a certain amount of time. I don't care what you brought in there. They would say, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. People were turned away. So a Catholic priest had his car towed, and they towed it to Metropolitan Towing in my district at Duncan and Vanderventer is where the lot was. And the Catholic priest didn't have his priest outfit on.
Collar, yeah.
Yeah, and he went in there to retrieve his car, and they wouldn't give it to him, and he got upset about it. Tony Giordano pulled a sawed-off shotgun on me. He said, either you get out of here or I'm going to blow you in half. He didn't know he was a Catholic priest. Well, the Catholic priest had influence. He had people so anyway, he got his car back, obviously. But then they said, oh my gosh, there's a problem at Metropolitan Towing. I don't know what it is, these politicians. So they put a cop sitting in front of Metropolitan Towing 24 hours a day. And I had 6 months on the police department. So I was one of the cops. I had to sit in front of this place for 8 hours a day in a police car. So I said,
rolls downhill, man.
Yeah. I said, what if I have to use the restroom? He said, well, okay, we'll let you go in there and use the restroom, but don't you go in there for any other reason. And you come out of there. I said, all right, fine. So I went in there, and hell, I hung out in there. And Tony Giordano and this other car thief, whose name I can't remember. Well, Tony Giordano was real talkative. He was saying like, when I was a kid, man, and I got arrested. They didn't have juvenile. They just put me in with the regular guys, and I grew up tough, and blah blah blah. He was talking. He was all the time talking. And there was a room there. I mean, see, they had this full of golf clubs in bags, and he said, they had pilfered
guns and clubs, officer.
Yeah,
I know. Oh yeah,
they had pilfered these clubs. He said, "Hey, you play golf?" I said, "Sure, I play golf." You want a set of golf clubs? No, man, I don't want any golf clubs. I mean, it was crazy, man. They were so used to giving cops or whatever, anybody.
Oh God,
whatever they wanted,
especially back in the '60s, up until
man.
We came on in the early '70s. That's when things kind of started changing, and I know you saw those changes. The older guys that were like the generation before you, when you came on as a young troop, it was different, and we changed things. We quit doing a lot of that stuff, and things modernized real quick. But there was always a rub between those older guys and us younger guys.
We started getting federal money for one thing, for cars, and guns and uniforms, and then eventually we started getting some pay raises
and raise pay. Yeah.
But the old guys when I came on, the old guys that were there, they were crooks. I mean, they were as big a crooks as the gangsters.
Yeah, I heard one guy say, we used to make $100 a month and all you could steal.
Yep. They were crooks, man.
Yeah. Oh, well, that was the good old days, as they say. I had this one intelligence guy who was one of the early members of the intelligence unit that was I think the first one or first two of one of two selected, because he was known as such a straight arrow guy. And he told me a story. When he came on, they assigned him with an older policeman. When they break in, you just get, ride with this guy tonight. Yeah. And he rode the West 12th Street car where there's a lot of joints. And so that guy, he drank all night and he took money all night. And then the end of the shift, he said he counted out the money on the bent seat and pushed part of it over and said, here, this is yours. And Ray said, I told him, I said, I don't need that, man. And got on out. He said, they'd never assigned me to ride with anybody again. I was a one-man car from then on. So
Yeah, man.
Oh,
Being a cop was wild back in the old days.
It was a great life though. I tell you, I had a great 25 years myself.
Yeah,
I
man. It was
couldn't believe it
interesting.
paid me to do some of that stuff.
It got me 9 books.
You got 9 books out there.
I
Well,
got 9 books out. Yeah.
all right. Well, I'll make sure, guys. I'll make sure I put a link to his author page. That's the easiest way to find Tim's books is go to his author page on Amazon. Tim, tell me some other stories that you remember. Those kind of little personal stories. Remember anything else about dealing with these guys?
Yeah. There was a guy, another, he wasn't a mafia guy. He was too smart to be a mafia guy. I'm talking about Donald Ray Woolbright. Have you ever heard that name?
It sounds vaguely familiar. I may know it from your book. I get so much in my head
Donald
sometimes.
Ray Woolbright was the guy that did the burglary on Howard Hughes's warehouse in Long Beach, California, and stole a bunch of stuff, including a lot of money. He was a safe man. He was actually a car dealer, but he was a safe man, and he went to L.A. and was selling Cadillacs. And in the meantime, he was staking out. He had a long range plan. It was to do Howard Hughes' safe in Long
Yeah.
Beach, and he did it. He was a safe cracker.
Huh.
And he came back to St. Louis. Well, he stole all this stuff, and he stole these CIA documents pertaining to a Russian submarine that had sunk, and the CIA paid Howard Hughes to try to retrieve
Oh, yeah.
the submarine or whatever. Anyway, he had all these documents. It was supposed to be top secret stuff. And Donald Ray Woolbright obtained them and a lot of money and a lot of jewelry too. And anyway, he came back to St. Louis flushed with money because the FBI was going to arrest him. And he said, I didn't do anything. I'm in possession of this stuff because a guy gave him to me, but I want to get rid of him and I'll sell him back to the government. And so he did. He sold all this stuff back to the federal government because the federal government didn't want any publicity on it.
Yeah.
So he sold all this top secret CIA stuff back to the government for a lot of money. And then he came back to St. Louis flush. Well, the FBI here was furious, man, because they knew Donald Ray. He was a notorious murderer and burglar. He was notorious. And he was just a very successful crook. And so the FBI hated him. So they had us following him around all the time. Horse for the FBI, man. They said, follow Donald Ray Woolbright. And so this is what we did. For a week, we followed him around, and he knew he was being followed. And we would write his license plate number down for people he talked to. And then he'd stop and write our license plate number down. I mean,
Yeah,
it was crazy.
there. Yeah, I know.
Man, Donald Ray Woolbright, he was just notorious, man. And Jesse Stone King. Did you ever hear about Jesse Stone King?
Oh yeah, you got a bunch of it in your book. Now I can't remember, but
Well, Jesse Stone King is the reason there isn't any more mafia in St. Louis. Uh, he was a notorious murderer, thief, professional crook, and he was also a car thief. And he had gone to prison over here in Illinois for some kind of a car theft. I don't know what it was. And Tom Fox, an FBI agent here, who was really, really smart, and his partner, whose name I can't remember, they went over and interviewed him. They tried to roll him over. And he said, it isn't going to work, man. I'm not going to do that for you. But before he went to prison, he had told Art Burney, who was now in charge of the East Side mob. He took Buster Workman's place, and he worked for Art Burney. He said, I'll go ahead and take the fall on this. But he had 2 families. He said, you take care of my families. He actually had 2 sets of wives, kids, dogs, cats, houses. And he said, you take care of my families while I'm gone. And they said, we'll take care of them. We'll take care of them. Well, they didn't. And his wives would come to the prison to visit him and say, we're destitute. Nobody's taking care of us. Well, it pissed him off. So he got out and he called Tom Fox. And he said, I'll work for you. So they wired him.
mm,
And he went into all these people. He had the reputation that if he walked in a room, crooks would flock to him, brag about what they'd done. And it was just amazing. Even people that weren't crooks would go up and say, I burned my car the other day, because it was in a car. I got the money for it. I mean, it was all on tape. All these people went to prison. He even got some guys. I think Joey Aiuppa may have gone to prison because of that. But all these organized crime guys took falls, and he did it. Jesse Stone King did it. But he robbed a guy a friend of mine over in Brussels, Illinois, an old politician. He was really wealthy, and they were gambling together. And he beat him up and took his diamond ring. It was like a 15-carat diamond ring. And they sealed off, it was on an island. They sealed the island off. And they started taking names of everybody that came out. Well, Jesse Stone King's best buddy was there, and they got his name. So the Illinois police came over to our office because they knew we had dossiers and all these people. They said, what do you think went on? I said, what the hell is Jesse Stone King? And they said, well, he's in prison. I said, no, he's not. I just saw him last week at a restaurant over in Belleville, Illinois. And we used to go over, there's this restaurant all the house used to eat at. We'd go over there and glare at him, and they'd glare back. But he was over there anyway. So Jesse, I hated him for knocking that old man over. He was a friend of mine. So we did a car check. He was with Mike Tripiano, and they split up and they ran to their cars and took off. And so I told my partner, stop Jesse Stone King. So we stopped him broad daylight. And I was mad at him. And I made him get out of the car.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, I'm suggesting you better carry yourself back to East St. Louis where you belong, man. You don't belong over here. And I said, and you knocked over a buddy of mine over in Brussels, Illinois. I don't appreciate that, man. I said, you probably don't know how I know that, do you, Jesse? And he just looked at me. And I said, you're going to get hurt real bad if you don't carry yourself back to Illinois. And he said, well, maybe the FBI would like to know that. And I said, hey, man, I don't give a damn about the FBI, or you either. So he took off. Anyway, so I got back in the car. They called me in the office. He said, you do a car check on Jesse Stone King? I said, yeah. I said, did you threaten to kill him? I said, no. They said, it's on tape, man. You did. I said, oh, that's Jesse Stone King. Yeah.
Oh, shit. It was on tape.
He was wired, Tim.
Yeah.
He was wired, man.
Oh, shit, Tim. Oh, shit.
Oh, yeah. I got all kinds of shit for that one, man.
Oh, I can imagine.
I was in big time trouble. And so so Jesse Stone King, everybody wants to kill him for being a snitch. He snitched on, I don't know, 50 guys.
Including you.
Yeah, including me. He got it all on tape. He was all tape. In fact, he even went to trial and testified in federal court to what he had done. And, but he didn't get Mike Tripiano. He didn't get it. He had him taped, but the jury wouldn't go along with it because I hated Jesse Stone King more than I hated Mike Tripiano. Everything was over with, and he didn't want to go into witness protection. He had these two families. He just wanted to live. So he bopped around hiding, and he'd come in and see his families, and he'd go hide somewhere else. Eventually, he ended up in Arizona, somewhere in Arizona, and he had a car repossession company. And this is FBI information that was in a newspaper. He was in a car, and a local cop did a car check on him. And the guy driving the car got out to talk to the cop, and Jesse allegedly shot himself in the head, committed suicide. Well, that's a damn lie. Yeah. And so they put that in the St. Louis paper. He's still around here. I'm sure he is.
Yeah.
But
interesting.
So anyway, yeah, he's still kicking. Of course, he'd be 80 now.
Timothy C. Richards, Cops Kill and Cops Lie, and several other books, which, guys, if you want to learn a whole lot more about St. Louis and East St. Louis, and, we talked a lot about, guys, if you're not familiar with the geography of the area, it's kind of like Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas. You got the Mississippi River over there, and then you talked about an island. I assume that was an island out in the river where they did that robbery.
Well, it was way north.
Way north up by Alton. And so that whole East St. Louis area is notorious for strip clubs and labor racketeering and really more notorious for two-bit criminals. And you can get anything you want in East St. Louis. It's kind of like KCK, kind of like a third world country in a way.
Definitely. It definitely is.
All right, Tim. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much for coming on.
Okay, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Don't forget, I like to ride motorcycles, so when you're out on the streets there in your big F-150, watch out for those little motorcycles when you're out. If you have a problem with PTSD and you've been in the service, be sure and go to the VA website, and they'll help with your drugs and alcohol problem if you got that problem, or gambling. If not, you can go to Anthony Ruggiano. He's a counselor down in Florida. He's got a hotline on his website. If you got a problem with gambling, most states will have, if you have gambling, most states will have a hotline number to call. Just have to search around for it. I've always got stuff to sell. I got my books, I got my movies. They're all on Amazon. Just go and I got links down below in the show notes, and just go to my Amazon sales page, and you can figure out what to do. I really appreciate y'all tuning in, and we'll keep coming back and doing this. Thanks, guys. This. Thanks, guys. This. Thanks, guys. This. Thanks, guys. This.